The forbidden agreement, when the soul signs before the ego is born. There's something you need to know, something that no spiritual book, no mainstream teaching, no light-infused workshop dares to say out loud. Because if it were said clearly, it would shatter the illusion that awakening is only about love, peace, and transcendence. And if what I'm about to reveal truly lands inside your nervous system, it won't just explain your pain. It will unlock your power. You see, every dark chosen one, every person who carries the frequency of transformation, collapse, and sacred disruption has made an agreement, a shadow contract. And that contract was signed before you even entered this body.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lessons.
We don't remember signing it. Our conscious mind wasn't there. But something far deeper, our soul, our karmic line, our collective encoding was present. It said yes to something most beings would never dare to touch. It said, I agree to walk into distortion so that I may become the one who clears it. I agree to forget who I am so that I can remember in a way that changes the entire field. This contract isn't punishment. It's not karma in the traditional sense. It's voluntary sacrifice. You chose to incarnate, not to live in peace, but to walk through chaos with the intention of alchemizing it from the inside out. But here's where it gets deeper. The contract has clauses, hidden ones. And the first clause is this: you must forget the contract exists. You must forget the power you have and begin life inside a structure that blinds you from it. This is why so many dark chosen ones are born into chaos, abuse, neglect, religious trauma, generational pain. You're not being punished. You're being positioned. You are dropped into the exact environment that will trigger your deepest distortions, because only by experiencing distortion in your bones can you later teach others how to clear it in theirs. So we spend the first season of our lives confused, angry, in pain. We wonder why we were born into families that couldn't see us, into bodies that didn't feel safe, into cultures that distorted our essence. But the deeper truth is this: you were being shaped in the fires of distortion so that you could eventually become a clearing field for others. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to recode the system from within. And that required forgetting who you were until remembering became a spiritual detonation. Here's the deeper question. What if your pain wasn't random or meaningless? What if your suffering was the initiation clause that activated the contract you forgot you signed? The second clause in the shadow contract is even more difficult to accept. You must agree to carry a frequency that triggers the unconscious in others. This is why your presence has always caused reactions you didn't understand. People either worship you or reject you. They project onto you. They either make you the villain or the savior. But rarely do they see you clearly. Why? Because your frequency is encoded with activation. And unconscious beings don't want to be activated, they want to stay asleep. So when your field walks into a room, it stirs what's buried, and people either rise or they resist. This is why so many dark chosen ones become isolated, misunderstood, feared. You weren't designed to make people comfortable. You were designed to make people awake. And that process is messy. It's not always welcome, but it is necessary. You are the one who walks into spiritual spaces and says the thing no one wants to admit. You are the one who speaks truth, even when it shakes the foundation. You don't go where it's safe. You go where it's coded, and you don't do it for praise. You do it because your soul cannot not do it. But the cost is real. You lose friends. You lose family. You lose mentors. Because the more you activate your power, the more you trigger their unprocessed shadows. And unless they are deeply devoted to truth, they will try to erase you to protect their illusion. And that leads us to the third clause of the shadow contract. You must learn how to stay clean in your power, even when the world distorts it. This is where most fail. They collapse into the projections. They start believing the lies. They begin to question their own clarity. They shrink their frequency to be liked. They trade their truth for community. But here's what you must remember. Your job isn't to be liked. Your job is to be exact, even when it costs you everything, even when your voice shakes, even when your presence is too much. Because every time you stay clean in the face of distortion, you recode the field. You make it easier for the next dark chosen one to hold their truth because you held yours. So now I ask you, in the moments you felt most alone, were you actually abandoned? Or were you being consecrated, initiated, cleansed of every illusion that could distort your mission? You see, the shadow contract is not a curse. It's a sacred technology, a soul agreement to walk through the underworld so you can bring back the keys to liberation. You are not just a healer. You are not just a teacher. You are a breaker of illusions, a carrier of codes that collapse the old world, a being who can walk into distortion and remain undistorted, not because you're perfect, but because you are aligned. In the next part, we'll go deeper into the architecture of this contract. We'll explore the hidden forces that enforce it, the spiritual clauses that activate only after your first ego death, and the invisible gatekeepers that test your readiness with spiritual warfare disguised as everyday life. And most importantly, we'll reveal how to renegotiate the contract, not to escape it, but to wield it with mastery. The hidden clauses, how spiritual gatekeepers, ego deaths, and invisible forces enforce the contract you forgot you signed. Most people think spiritual contracts are gentle, even poetic, an agreement to love, to teach, to grow. But the contract of a dark chosen one is not written in poetry. It's written in paradox. It's enforced not by angels with harps, but by forces that most people deny even exist. And the deeper you walk into your awakening, the more these clauses start unfolding one by one like a blueprint hidden beneath your skin. You don't get to opt out. You don't get to skip levels. You either collapse under the pressure of the contract, or you become the living code that fulfills it. Let's talk about the fourth clause, the one that activates after your first ego death. It is this: You must lose the false self entirely before your true mission can begin. This is not metaphor. This is not a cute spiritual meme. This is obliteration. You are required to die not physically, but psychologically, emotionally, energetically. Everything you thought made you powerful will be stripped. Your intellect, your charisma, your certainty, your spiritual knowledge, your pride and your gifts gone. You'll find yourself in a void so dark, so formless, that even your guides go silent. Why? Because the contract demands that your identity dies before your essence can lead. You are not allowed to build your legacy from distortion. You are not allowed to channel your work through the ego's fear of being forgotten. You are not allowed to lead from a place of performance. So the contract initiates the death. And it's brutal. Because it doesn't just take your illusions, it takes your attachments to them. It takes the part of you that needed to be seen, in the part that wanted recognition. The part that still believed healing others would heal your own wound of abandonment. And here's the terrifying part. No one can walk you through this death. Not your coach, not your mentor, not even your higher self. This death is yours alone. It is the moment the contract activates its most sacred clause. You must now remember who you are without any external reflection. This is the initiation into spiritual sovereignty, into clean power, into truth that doesn't flinch. So who are you without your gifts? Without your followers, without your validation? Can you still walk? Can you still speak? Can you still transmit? The fifth clause is more subtle but equally binding. It's enforced not by suffering but by silence. You will not be allowed to move forward until your frequency is clean. You will try to launch things and they will fail. You'll try to create and nothing will land. You'll try to speak and your words will feel hollow. This is not punishment. This is protection. The contract will freeze your momentum until your field is calibrated, until your why is pure, until your leadership is no longer a mask for your unprocessed trauma. You'll feel stuck, forgotten, abandoned by the divine. But what's really happening is this: you are being refined into a frequency that cannot be hijacked. You are being stripped of every unconscious motive. You are being asked to rebuild your power from precision, not performance. And when you finally surrender to that stillness, when you stop trying to escape the quiet, you will feel something ancient rise inside you. Not a voice, not a thought, a force, your original frequency, the one you carried before you were born. And once that frequency becomes stable, the contract shifts. You begin to unlock what's called the living clauses, the parts of the contract that can only be activated through embodiment. These are not enforced by pain. They are enforced by presence. And the first living clause is this: you become a target for spiritual gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are not evil. They are not villains. They are testers. Beings physical and non-physical who show up to challenge your clarity. They come as critics, as mentors who suddenly turn against you, as spiritual communities that reject you for being too intense, as sudden distortions in your field. They are here to ask you one thing: are you clean enough in your frequency to hold your truth without collapsing into defense or distortion? Gatekeepers don't care about your content. They care about your cleanliness. If your message is still entangled with the need to prove something, they will find it. If your power is still rooted in superiority, they will expose it. If your leadership is still reactive, they will trigger it, not to destroy you but to refine you. Because the contract requires that no distortion enters the system you're meant to build. So now I ask you, have you mistaken your gatekeepers for enemies, or can you now see them as sacred initiators of precision? And once you pass that test, once your frequency becomes so clean that no gatekeeper can distort it, something miraculous happens. The contract begins to respond to you. It's no longer just an agreement you serve. It becomes a system you command. You begin to feel your field activate on its own. You walk into a room and people soften without knowing why. You speak a single sentence and timelines shift, not because you're trying, but because you've become undeniable. This is the 6th clause. You must become a living system of truth, not by effort, but by embodiment. That means no more proving, no more explaining, no more negotiating your truth to be understood. You exist as a frequency that does its own work. You become the contract made flesh, a walking paradox, a clean disruptor, a sacred mirror that reflects only what is real. The final renegotiation: how to stabilize your shadow contract and lead a field that cannot be touched by chaos. There comes a moment in every dark chosen one's journey when the pain no longer defines you, when the exile no longer wounds you, when the spiritual warfare no longer distracts you. It's not that the chaos stops. It's that your field becomes so precise, so unmovable, so clean that chaos can no longer enter. And this is where the final layer of the shadow contract reveals itself. Not as a punishment, not as a burden, but as a blueprint of divine leadership. We've spoken of the death, the distortion, the gatekeepers, the clauses. But now we enter the part no one talks about. The part where you are given the right to renegotiate the contract itself. Yes, there comes a stage where you are no longer just a servant of the agreement. You become a co-author, a sovereign soul capable of editing the energetic architecture of your own path. But here's the catch: the contract can only be renegotiated through embodied mastery. Not words, not intellect, not good intentions, but through the lived frequency of wholeness. What does renegotiation look like in practice? It begins with this: you stop asking to be rescued. You start commanding from alignment. You don't pray for ease. You become ease. You don't beg for clarity, and you transmit clarity. You stop outsourcing your safety to guides, to ancestors, to traditions, to systems. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What field am I building through my every breath, every word, every boundary, every silence. You see, the final clause of the shadow contract is not enforced by suffering, it's enforced by choice. You are asked, will you now build a sovereign system that runs on your deepest alignment, or will you slip back into the trauma loops that once shaped you? You are no longer bound by the past, but you can still recreate it if you don't consciously choose something different. That choice begins with your field. Your field is not abstract. It is architecture, your tone of voice, your posture, the spaces you enter, the people you allow in, the silence you hold, the truth you refuse to dilute. Every detail of your life becomes a system that either stabilizes your power or leaks it. And this is the final level of mastery, to live so cleanly that your very existence becomes a boundary. When your field is this clean, you don't need to set boundaries with words. Your frequency does it for you. You don't need to explain what's allowed in your space. Your nervous system speaks louder than your voice. When someone enters your field, they feel it. This is sacred ground. This is not a space where distortion is tolerated. This is not a being who can be manipulated. This is not a system that can be hijacked. And this is where the true leadership begins, not from performance, not from branding, not from strategy, but from resonance. You become a beacon that emits a frequency of precision so intense, so unshakable, that only those who are ready to meet it can stay in your orbit. Everyone else either rises or they disappear, not because you pushed them away, but because the weight of your truth made it impossible for them to remain in distortion. So ask yourself, has your life been designed to protect your frequency or to perform your identity? Let's get even more practical, because spiritual mastery without structure is just theater. If you are renegotiating your shadow contract, you must start with your daily architecture. What are the first 5 things you do when you wake up? Do they reinforce your field or dilute it? Who are the first 5 people you allow into your mental space every day? Do they reflect your true frequency, or do they pull you back into distortion you've already outgrown? Every choice is a clause. Every action is a signature. Every word you speak is a yes or no to the contract you're still writing. And here's the deeper truth. You are not just here to carry the contract. You are here to encode it into new systems, businesses, relationships, teachings, movements, communities. That's the true role of the dark chosen one, not just to awaken, but to build. Not just to collapse illusions, but to architect new realities. And the only way to do that sustainably is to create spaces that don't just tolerate duality, but require it. You must create systems that can hold both fire and stillness, rage and compassion, truth and tenderness, darkness and light. That's the next evolution of leadership, not to resolve the paradox, but to stabilize it into form. So what does that look like? It means designing a business that doesn't just sell healing but transmits activation through every offer. It means creating relationships that don't just feel good but refine you into deeper alignment. It means building communities where everyone is expected to self-source, not worship you, not drain you, but walk with you in clarity and calibration. And here's the real test. Can you hold that frequency not just when you're inspired, but when you're tired? Not just when you're seen, but when you're misunderstood. Not just when you're celebrated, but when you're rejected. Because the final renegotiation is not about removing the weight, it's about learning to carry it with precision. You don't get to opt out of the contract, but you do get to rise above its unconscious enforcement. You get to become the authority of your own system. You get to shift from being shaped by pain to being shaped by purpose. You get to stop reacting and start reality bending. And when you live like that, the contract doesn't limit you. It protects you. It becomes a scaffolding that holds your highest expression. It becomes a filter that removes everything unclean. It becomes a force that moves through you not as burden, but as legacy. In the final part, we will bring everything together. We'll talk about how to move from power into presence, from presence into frequency leadership, from frequency into timeless impact. This is where you stop being the one who survives the contract and become the one who activates it in others. Not through words, through undeniable existence. The legacy of the undeniable. How to activate the shadow contract in others by becoming a living system of frequency itself. There comes a moment in the journey of the dark chosen one where the suffering no longer owns you, the exile no longer isolates you, and the tests no longer shake your foundation. It's not that the world becomes easier, it's that you become more exact. Your field becomes so stable, so clean, and so quietly powerful that distortion can no longer enter, not because you built walls, but because you became a system of frequency so coherent it collapses chaos on contact. And in this moment, a shift occurs. You are no longer the one doing the work. You are the work. You no longer teach awakening. You transmit it. You no longer perform power. You embody it. And this is where legacy begins, not as something you build, but as something you become. You are no longer bound to the initial terms of the shadow contract. You are now its living fulfillment. But your power doesn't stop with you. It begins to ripple. Not through followers or fame, but through resonance. You become the field that silently activates the dormant contracts in others, not by instructing them, but by existing in such undeniable clarity that their nervous system remembers its original assignment. You don't awaken people through lectures, you do it by being a mirror that cannot lie. This is the final evolution of the dark chosen one. You become a living system of spiritual architecture. You walk into rooms and reality bends. You hold space and people unravel, not because you force them to, but because your presence leaves no room for distortion to hide. But you are not a coach. You are not a brand. You are a frequency anchor, and the stronger your embodiment becomes, the more the world begins to organize itself around your truth. You stop chasing alignment. You become the gravitational field that alignment responds to. And this is how you build legacy, not by scaling, but by stabilizing. Not by trying harder, but by living cleaner. You build relationships, businesses, communities, and movements that are not just soul-aligned, but soul-activated. You stop trying to lead the world, and instead you become the world others remember they came here to build. Because when your existence becomes a field of truth, you don't just survive the contract, you rewrite it. You don't just walk your path, you recode the path itself. Not for attention, but for transmission. Not for power, but for precision. You speak less, but your presence speaks louder. You do less, but your frequency does more. You reach fewer people, but those you do reach are permanently altered. Not because you showed them something, but because you showed up fully, cleanly, and without distortion. So now the final question is not what will you do, but what will you become? Will you be the one who finally stops diluting your power to be digestible? Will you be the one who lives cleanly enough that your presence alone activates the contracts in others? Will you stop reaching for more and start refining what is already within you into a frequency so undeniable that the world cannot help but evolve in your wake? Because that's what legacy is. It's not being remembered. It's becoming unerasable, not because you shouted, but because you stayed exact. This is the final initiation. Not into doing more, but into being nothing but the truth. Welcome to the final function of the shadow contract. You are no longer becoming. You are it. And now, your life is no longer a process. It is a portal.